The TV world was shifting. The age of anti-heroes had begun. Ambitious storytellers were crafting characters that weren't clean-cut or heroic, but human, complex, broken. And in Birmingham, England, screenwriter Stephen Knight was creating something. Personal. A show unlike anything else, set in the gritty aftermath of World War I, rooted in truth, blood, and smoke. A historical gangster epic inspired by the stories his uncles used to tell, passed down like family legend. Knight wanted to tell the tale of a family, the Shelbys, carving their name into post-war poverty with fists and fire, and one man. At the center of it all, Tommy Shelby, a veteran haunted by the trenches, as clever as he was cold, surrounded by loyalty, but unsure who might shoot him in the back. He had to lead, but never trusted power. Knight believed this show would only work if Tommy worked, and Tommy needed to be perfect. The question was, who could wear that flat cap? Inside early casting meetings, the answer seemed obvious. Producers leaned toward someone gritty, physically intimidating, charming but dangerous. And one name stood out: Jason Statham. Yes, that Jason Statham, the transporter. The bald-headed knockout with a star-studded list of action films under his belt. The kind of actor whose walk made a character believable. Long before he said a word, Statham was confident, rugged, iconic. Stephen Knight later admitted, "I met with Jason and we seriously considered him. He had the presence. He was so physically Tommy, you'd believe he'd win every fight. On paper, he seemed like the perfect choice. What he didn't expect was a quiet little message from an unexpected contender." Cut 2. Dublin. A cluttered kitchen table. A half-drunk cup of tea. Early morning softness through the window. There, in the silence of his home, Cillian Murphy sits reading the Peaky Blinders pilot script. At this point in his career, Murphy already had a decade of remarkable performances. Behind him, he had shown in indie films, delivered chilling psychopathy in Batman Begins, carried apocalyptic loneliness in 28 Days Later, and even taken on glam rock beauty in Breakfast on Pluto. But he wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy, and he definitely wasn't anyone's obvious gangster. Yet, something in that script called to him. He saw something in Tommy. Not muscle, not bravado, but ice, stillness, calculation, and more than anything, pain. So, he did something that would forever change the trajectory of his life. He sent Stephen Knight a simple text: "Remember, I'm an actor." It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't desperation. It was a reminder. Don't count me out. Just because I don't look like your idea of danger. Let me show you what I can become. Knight hesitated. He still wasn't sure. But there was something about Cillian. Something. In his unnerving control, his intelligence, the detail in his choices that pulled at his gut. He agreed to a test. Cillian flew to London. No suit, no hairstyle. No attempt to mimic Tommy's look. He walked into the room as himself, slender, pale, quiet, almost ghost-like. Knight would later say he didn't walk in like a gangster. But then something happened. When the cameras rolled, something shifted behind Cillian's eyes. He barely moved. He spoke one line, then another. No volume. No effort to intimidate, just presence. Time slowed down, and then silence. Knight looked at his fellow producers and said, without hesitation, "That's Tommy Shelby." The risk was colossal. Cillian wasn't a name that sold posters around the world. He hadn't carried major TV before. He wasn't physically imposing. But Knight followed his instinct. And so did the BBC. Filming began in the dark corners of Liverpool, transformed into 1919 Birmingham. Smoke machines, mud, tailored suits cut like armor. And at the center, one man slowly disappearing before their eyes. Cillian didn't just play Tommy, he built him piece by piece. from the inside out. He changed his voice to a low, breathy drawl, full of mystery and menace. He studied veterans of World War. I, too, learned how trauma lives on in the body. And he stopped blinking during scenes because Tommy always needed to feel like the person watching was under his control. He chain-smoked herbal cigarettes for hours, burned through journals of character notes, and worked in almost complete silence between takes. His co-stars said being around him was like being in a cathedral, heavy, with something spiritual, something dangerous. Even the costume department redesigned Tommy's wardrobe after watching how Cillian moved, more tailored, more precise, to match the coiled power in his stillness. He wasn't acting tough, he was living pain, and yet, as Peaky Blinders hit screens that first season, there were doubts. Early viewers asked, was he too quiet? Was he believable as a gang leader? Could someone this soft-spoken really terrify a room? But episode by episode, opinion changed. Not by shouting, not by violence, but by dominating the screen with silence. Tommy Shelby didn't have to raise his voice, because behind those blue eyes was war. And Cillian Murphy made you feel every scar, even when they weren't visible. Across 6 seasons, Peaky Blinders grew from a niche BBC drama to a full-blown cultural force. It inspired fashion, music, fan pages, tattoos, dot everywhere from London to São Paulo. People quoted by order of the Peaky Blinders, like scripture, and at the center of the storm was the man no one expected to hold it all together. But Cillian didn't want the spotlight. He never chased it. He rarely even gave interviews. No social media, no big parties. He once said, "Fame is like falseness to me. I don't understand needing that." Fame came fast, and for a man who'd spent his life trying to disappear into characters, it felt overwhelming. He once told a reporter, "There are no cool, mysterious movie stars anymore. Everyone's online. Everyone's selling something. I just want to act." Behind the scenes, the weight got heavier. Season after season, Tommy Shelby grew darker. More power, more consequence, more ghosts. And the more Tommy spiraled, the deeper Cillian had to go. Friends and cast members noticed it, changed him. He'd go home from set, quiet and drained. He didn't break character. But he did carry the tone of the man long after wrap. And then, in 2021, came a heartbreak no one could act through. Helen McCrory, who played Aunt Polly, the beating heart of the Shelby family, passed away after a private fight with cancer. Cillian was devastated. She was more than a co-star. She was an anchor, a guide. She understood the soul of the show better than anyone. And for Murphy, whose performance relied on nuance, on connection, on real chemistry, her loss shook everything. Filming the final season without her was like walking through a storm with no compass. The scenes felt colder, emptier. The pain on screen was real. At the heart of Peaky Blinders, among the gunfire, ambition, and madness, there was always her. Aunt Polly, fierce, fearless, loyal to the bone, played by Helen McCrory, a force of nature on screen. And off to Cillian Murphy. She wasn't just his scene partner. She was his protector in character, his compass as Tommy, and in real life his friend. When Helen passed away in 2021 after a private fight with cancer, most of the world didn't know. She hadn't made it public. She kept working, pushing, creating. But when the news broke, everything stopped. Cillian stood still. Not as Tommy, as a man grieving someone who helped shape his journey. He later called her the most extraordinary actor I've ever worked with. And it showed. Every look they shared on screen carried history. Every word between their characters was electric because they trusted each other completely. Without her, the Peaky Blinders world suddenly felt unanchored. And from day one on set, something was missing. No Polly, no Helen. Her absence wasn't just written around, it was felt. The first episode opens with the silence of her funeral. No dialogue, just fire. Smoke, ashes, and in that moment, Cillian wasn't acting. That pain was real, he said in a rare interview. It was the hardest season. There was grief in every scene. Somewhere between fiction and life, between guilt and silence. Tommy Shelby finally shattered, and it was Cillian who let the pieces fall. Behind the scenes, filming was more intense than ever. Cillian had always taken acting seriously. But for season 6, he went even deeper. He read books on grief, listened to music in character, researched war trauma, losing loved ones, suicidal ideation. Every evening after filming, he would go home and sit in silence. He later said he avoided interviews because he couldn't switch off. Tommy. He wasn't method, but the intensity of the show left him emotionally and physically exhausted. He smoked nearly 1,000 herbal cigarettes during that final season, one in almost every scene. Fans began to notice how raw he looked, how thin, even his eyes seemed darker. This wasn't makeup, this was Cillian Murphy giving everything before walking away by the time the final episode aired. Peaky Blinders wasn't just a hit, from haircuts to high fashion, memes to murals. Tommy Shelby had transcended television, but something about the final season felt different. Cillian didn't ride off into the sunset with a villain's smirk. He walked into the burning end tired, worn, and empty, because he had finally put Tommy to rest, and with him, buried a decade of emotional weight. He disappeared. Intentionally, he said no to action franchises, no to superhero universes, no to box office bait. He returned to Ireland, spent time with his wife and sons, played music again, breathed normally. The weight of Tommy Shelby slowly lifted. But just as the smoke cleared, another door opened, and behind it was Christopher Nolan. Nolan wasn't a stranger to Murphy. They had worked together for years. Batman Begins, Inception, Dunkirk, but this time Nolan didn't want Cillian for a side character. He wanted him to be the center of the universe, a role that required just as much silence, stillness, and inner chaos as Tommy Shelby, but this time in a different war. A different kind of weapon. A man who changed history, not with guns, but equations. When Murphy agreed to play Oppenheimer, he didn't do it for fame or awards, but because, deep down, he knew how to carry a haunted soul. He knew what it meant to bury guilt. The same eyes that once watched over Birmingham with bone-chilling power now watched the world collapse under mushroom clouds. Oppenheimer became one of the most critically acclaimed films of the decade. Cillian's performance was declared a masterclass in restraint. He didn't shout, he didn't grandstand, he whispered destruction, and for it, he won the Oscar. Just a man finally being seen for doing what he's always done, letting the work speak now. Years since he first walked onto the Peaky Blinders, set with narrowed eyes and quiet menace. Cillian Murphy has fully grown into his legend, but he never asked for it. He never chased it. He once said, "The less people know about me, the better. It makes the characters feel more real." And that's exactly what made his journey so beautiful. Sometimes, all it takes is silence, sorrow, and presence. That's the legacy of Cillian Murphy. That's the power of what almost didn't happen.